Every banned UFC move explained. 12-6 elbows. The strike that gave Jon Jones his only loss. One single elbow, perfectly legal in every other angle, turned into the most controversial rule in UFC history. It cost Jon Jones the only official loss of his career, and still sparks debates today. 12-6 elbows refer to a straight downward strike, like the motion of a clock's hands going from 12 to 6. On paper, it sounds no more dangerous than any spinning elbow or hook. But early MMA regulators feared this move could crush skulls or shatter spines, without much evidence. The rule came from outdated fears. When state commissions watched martial arts demos in the late 1990s, they were shown downward elbows breaking blocks of ice and concrete. That visual stuck, leading regulators to believe 12-6 elbows were uniquely deadly. But here's where it gets infamous. In 2009, Jon Jones was dominating Matt Hamill. During ground and pound, he threw a few 12-6 elbows. Hamill couldn't continue after the sequence. The referee reviewed the footage and disqualified Jones, the only blemish on his professional record. Dana White later called it one of the worst calls ever. To this day, many fighters and fans argue the rule is outdated. UFC commentator Joe Rogan regularly blasts the 12-6 elbow ban as illogical. However, if you thought that was odd, wait till you hear about kicks that were once perfectly legal, even while your opponent was down and helpless. And that's what we'll show you now. Soccer kicks. One of the most brutal sights in MMA history, a fighter winding up and kicking a grounded opponent's head like a football. These violent kicks were once common in Pride FC, but they're fully banned in UFC. Soccer kicks allowed fighters to finish opponents mercilessly. When someone dropped to the mat, they weren't safe. That's when the most vicious fighters pounced, literally booting heads with full force. In Pride, these moments were crowd favorites. Wanderlei Silva, Shogun Rua, and Mirko Cro Cop delivered some of the most shocking soccer kicks ever caught on camera. Fans in Japan embraced it as part of the sport's raw danger. However, as MMA moved into global regulation, U.S. athletic commissions banned any kicks to the head of a grounded fighter. The unified rules adopted in the early 2000s strictly outlawed soccer kicks, calling them too dangerous for brain trauma and spinal injuries. Yet controversy remains. Fighters like Mauricio Shogun Rua have argued, soccer kicks end fights quickly, safer than letting someone recover to take more punches. Even today, organizations like One Championship allow modified versions of soccer kicks under specific rules, reigniting debates whether the UFC is too cautious. However, what comes next is a banned move that wasn't about kicks or elbows, but stomping directly onto a fighter's head while grounded. And if you stick with me, you'll see why that one terrified fans even more. Stomps. The most visually terrifying move in MMA history. It's one thing to punch or kick your opponent, but stomping on someone's head as they lie defenseless? That image almost got MMA banned entirely before the UFC even went mainstream. Stomps were legal in early Pride fights, and fighters like Wanderlei Silva turned them into an art form. When his opponents collapsed to the ground, Wanderlei wouldn't hesitate. He'd rush in, plant one foot, and stomp downward on their heads with full force, creating horrifying visuals for anyone watching. Unlike soccer kicks, where at least there's distance and wind-up, stomps happen at point-blank range. There's little time for referees to react, and the risk of skull fractures, concussions, and neck injuries skyrockets. U.S. athletic commissions hated this image. When they negotiated the unified rules of MMA, stomps were among the first moves banned. The rule reads, stomping a grounded opponent is considered an illegal strike. Even fighters who experienced it agreed it was dangerous. Rampage Jackson, after receiving stomps in Pride, said, "It's one thing to lose, it's another to get stomped like you don't even matter." But if stomps were horrifying, the next banned move still manages to sneak into fights almost every weekend. Sometimes accidentally, sometimes not. And that's exactly what we will reveal next. Groin strikes. The rule. Everyone knows, but fighters still break. There's one area every fighter hopes never gets hit. But somehow groin strikes remain one of the most common fouls in UFC history. And while it's banned, it keeps happening again and again. From the very beginning, direct attacks to the groin have been illegal under UFC rules. But during fast-paced exchanges, accidental kicks or knees frequently land below the belt, leaving fighters writhing on the canvas. The rules allow a 5-minute recovery period for low blows. Sometimes fighters recover. Other times, the pain changes the entire course of a fight. One of the most infamous low-blow moments came during the 2021 bantamweight title fight between Aljamain Sterling and Petr Yan. Although the illegal strike that caused Sterling to win the belt was technically a knee to the head of a grounded opponent, the bout also had earlier low blows that disrupted momentum. Multiple fights have ended prematurely due to repeated groin strikes. Fighters like Donald Cerrone, Anthony Smith, and even legends like Georges St-Pierre have all taken brutal low blows in their careers. But even with protection, one poorly aimed kick can turn a championship bout into a painful, awkward, and controversial spectacle. Eye gouging, the move that can blind a fighter forever. One wrong move, one extended finger, and a fighter's entire career could be over in an instant. Eye pokes aren't just illegal, they're among the most feared fouls in MMA. Under UFC rules, any deliberate or accidental eye gouge is strictly prohibited. But despite the rule, eye pokes remain frustratingly common due to open finger gloves and extended hand positioning while measuring distance. The danger is immediate. Detached retinas, torn corneas, or even complete blindness can result from a single poke. Fighters like Michael Bisping suffered permanent vision loss, fighting the latter part of his career with just one functional eye after multiple pokes. Some fighters, like Jon Jones, have been heavily criticized for frequent eye pokes. While Jones denies any intent, his long reach combined with open-handed striking often resulted in accidental fouls. Daniel Cormier was another frequent victim in their rivalry. Referees often stop the fight temporarily, giving injured fighters time to recover. But in many cases, the damage lingers or alters the entire outcome of the fight. As dangerous as eye gouging is, the next banned move goes even deeper, right into the brutal world of headbutts that once defined early UFC days. And that's exactly where we're heading next. Headbutts. Before gloves, rules, and rounds existed, headbutts were part of early UFC chaos. Today, one headbutt could end your UFC career and your opponent's eyesight, jaw, or orbital bone. In the original UFC events of the 1990s, nearly anything was allowed. Fighters like Mark Coleman and Mark Kerr frequently used headbutts to brutal effect, smashing foreheads into grounded opponents' faces while pinning them down. The result? Bloody faces, broken noses, and crushed eye sockets. The brutality was raw, but it was also a PR disaster. As the sport grew and faced political pressure to survive, regulators saw headbutts as a clear symbol of uncontrolled violence. The unified rules banned headbutts entirely by 2000, classifying them as excessively dangerous strikes that could fracture skulls or cause life-altering injuries. The logic is simple. A fighter can't protect against a head driving downward with full force while pinned. The risk of concussions, brain trauma, and facial disfigurement is extremely high. Even accidental head clashes during legal exchanges often lead to serious cuts or fight stoppages. Fighters like Alistair Overeem and Nate Diaz have both suffered nasty gashes from accidental head clashes. Spiking, the slam that can paralyze instantly. One wrong drop, one bad angle, and a fighter's neck could snap on live television. Spiking remains one of the most feared and strictly banned moves in the UFC. Spiking refers to any technique where a fighter is slammed or dropped directly on their head or neck, forcing their cervical spine to absorb the full impact. The risk of instant paralysis or even death makes it one of the few zero-tolerance rules in MMA. The unified rules define spiking as intentionally driving an opponent's head or neck into the ground. Suplexes and throws are allowed only if the opponent lands on their back or shoulders, not their head. One of the most infamous near-spike finishes happened at UFC 34 when Matt Hughes slammed Carlos Newton. Newton was unconscious after being slammed headfirst, though Hughes argued it was unintentional as he was fading himself. Regardless, Hughes was awarded the victory, but controversy followed. Even accidental spikes can lead to severe consequences. Fighters are trained to avoid dropping opponents at dangerous angles, but during scrambles, positions can shift in split seconds. But while spiking is terrifying, the next banned move is even more savage, designed to rip, tear, and permanently damage your opponent's face or hands. Stick with me because this one gets extremely ugly. Fish hooking and small joint manipulation. Some illegal moves are so gruesome that they've barely ever been attempted in UFC history. Fish hooking and small joint manipulation are at the very top of that list. Fish hooking involves inserting fingers into an opponent's mouth, nose, or cheek and pulling violently. This barbaric technique can rip facial muscles, tear the mouth open, and dislocate jaws. It's the kind of street fight brutality that regulators banned before the UFC even launched. Small joint manipulation focuses on bending or twisting individual fingers or toes. While large joint locks like arm bars or knee bars are legal, grabbing a single finger allows opponents to easily snap tendons or dislocate joints with minimal force. The unified rules strictly outlaw both techniques. No fish hooking, no twisting or pulling of individual fingers or toes. Because these moves offer little opportunity for defense, the damage is instant and often permanent. Fighters train to defend against chokes and locks, but defending against a sudden finger snap is nearly impossible. There are very few known cases of attempted fish hooking in modern UFC history. Even accidental finger grabs draw immediate warnings from referees. These brutal techniques are the clearest examples of rules created not for competition, but for long-term fighter safety. Their permanent ban is one of the few rules that no serious fighter or fan argues against. But while these moves are outlawed, there are still more controversial UFC bans that fans keep debating, and that's exactly what we'll explore in future videos. Subscribe for more banned moves, shocking UFC moments, and brutal fight secrets you've never heard before. More coming soon.